Well, good morning again.
Morning.
I'm excited to be back. We got a great trip down to Louisiana. Got to experience Mardi Gras, which I was scared to tell people where we were going because of the connotation. But honestly, it was great, and in fact, it was so family friendly. Like, I wish we if our church was down there, like, I could definitely see it as an awesome ministry opportunity. It's pretty awesome. It was fun. But we appreciate you all having services without us, and I'm excited to jump back into Full Me February.
All right.
So for those of you that don't know, Full Me February, we had every Sunday of January, there's a bucket at the back with some index cards that everyone, whatever questions that were bothering you, that you just wanted to have an answer for, you're able to ask anonymously. And so now we're getting to dedicate that, and we're going to be looking at a problem that I believe we all face. There's an issue that every human being will face at some point, if not multiple points throughout your life. And that's the experience of pain and suffering. See, last Wednesday you may have heard of the school shooting at Sherman Douglas High School. In Florida, there is a school shooter that claimed the lives of 17 people. 3 months ago, there was the shooting in Southern Springs, Texas. Some of our very near friends and loved ones. 12 of the 20 deadliest shootings in the United States have occurred within the last decade. These are dark times. There are no words to describe the anguish that's being felt by those that are going through these tragedies. Our hearts, our prayers, they have and they will continue to go out to them. There's so many tragic stories. There's so much pain in the world today. And it causes many people, and Christians as well, to ask why. Why? Why did God allow this to happen? Why does God allow suffering? Why is there evil in the world today? Unfortunately, pain and suffering are realities that everyone's going to face. There's disease, abuse, betrayal, grief, injuries and illnesses, heartache, wrongdoing, and perhaps the most common, death. These tragedies, these evils in our world, they cause us to question God. Why would you allow this to happen? And you may be wrestling with these pains this morning. There may be some of you in this room, and in fact, I'd almost guarantee it, that are questioning God, saying, why would you allow this to happen? Why is there evil in the world today? Why do bad things happen to good people? They don't deserve it. My father's a pastor. Why does he have cancer? Well, I have some news. You're not the first person to ask that question.
That's right.
I considered having everyone close our eyes this morning and raise your hand if you ever question God for some injustice or for some evil that you've experienced. And I'm confident that a majority, if not all, of us would raise our hands. We've experienced this tragedy. We've experienced this loss. Job, we're not the first. Job, think about him. His own wife was saying, curse God and die. Don't you see this? And his friends are like, you must have sinned. You must have messed up. You must have done something to deserve this punishment. It just doesn't happen for no reason. What is the reason? They were questioning why God would allow this to happen to Job, who was a righteous man. Jesus himself, in John chapter 16, verse 33, says that we will experience tribulation. He says, in the world you will have tribulation. This word thlipsis, tribulation, thlipsis, It's literally pressure. Inescapable pressure. The mindset of the audience in this time reading this would be thinking of a wine press, the pressure that's being exerted on these olives or the grapes or whatever it might be, that's being exerted onto this tremendous weight, this burden that is inescapable. There's tribulation in the world today. There's thlipsis in the world today. We have pressure. And all throughout the Bible, we're told that every person will face suffering and tribulation. But why does God allow this pain? Why does God allow suffering? If you were to pressure me for an answer this morning, I would have to answer, I don't know. I can't explain to you immediately just this is what we have, this is why, this is the reason. I can't think the way God does. I don't have his mind. I can't discern. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. It says, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known." See, think about this. He likens our understanding of the world, our knowledge of evil, of theology, of God even, as looking into a dimly lit mirror, a dust-covered mirror, whatever it might be, whatever illustration that will make that mirror less pure, less clear. That's where we're at today. In this life, we are seeing dimly, in a dim mirror. But one day, we will see, and it will be as if we are face to face. Yeah. We will see with perfect clarity, and we will understand. And so I don't want to scare you off and say that I don't know, but at the same time, I think we should investigate this. Does this mean that we should just drop this question altogether because we can't fully understand it? No, not at all. See, I remember there was one time my family were on a trip to Colorado, and we were driving through the mountains, and a fog bank rolled in and covered basically the whole state, it seemed like. And it was thick fog. I don't know, have you all driven in some of that thick fog where you can't even see past your headlights? It's scary. I remember we were driving along, and as we were driving, we would take turns and stuff like that, and it just so happened to be me. I'd look out, and the only way I knew I was still on the road was by the center line of the road. And I just kind of followed that, glancing up occasionally to make sure I didn't see tail lights or something and run into somebody. I couldn't see the destination. I couldn't see what was around me per se, but there were guide lines on the road that steered me in the right direction, that let me know I was going the right way. And just to kind of finish that story up, later we found out what we were driving in, and some of those cliffs that had straight drop-offs for hundreds of feet, and I was praising God that we didn't go down one of those things. Oh my goodness. So many times we should have died. Anyway, God's grace, right? But just because we're unable to see perfectly clear in this mirror, because we don't have a perfect understanding, an all-encompassing understanding, does not mean we should give up the pursuit, or that we cannot catch glimpses of the truth. In the same way, if your windshield is defrosting, I think we've all done it at some point, but you look through the one spot that's actually clear that you can see through, and you're driving through that one spot, making sure you're like trying to get down the road because you're late to work or whatever it may be. We've all been there. Just because we can't see the full picture, and I'm not condoning we do that, by the way, but just because we don't see the full picture does not mean we should give up the pursuit, that we can't catch glimpses of the truth. And so this morning, I believe that there are 4 road lines in the fog, if you will, that will guide or that will steer us to a better understanding of how to answer this question of why. Why does God allow suffering and evil in the world? First point is, we need to understand that God did not create suffering and evil. Amen. God did not create evil. Many people, theologians all throughout history have argued to this point. Well, if God's all powerful and he's all good and loving, then why wouldn't he get rid of the evil in the world? Or there's so many different arguments along those same lines of, if God truly has the power, then why isn't he exercising it and getting rid of it? Genesis 1:31, it says that God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. God didn't create evil. The world was not created evil. It was good. It was very good. If God didn't create evil, then where did it come from, though? It has to have a source. Okay. Well, when God created the universe and created mankind, human beings, he made it possible for us to experience love. But in order to give us the ability to love, God had to give us free will to choose or to decide whether or not to love. Whether to love or not to love. There has to be a choice. Love always involves a choice. I remember whenever I was little, I grew up with Barney and Friends, the dinosaur, the purple dinosaur. Yeah, I know. That's the only time you're going to hear me admit it. But I remember I had a toy plush Barney dinosaur doll that when you'd squeeze his hand or claw or hand, I don't know, you'd squeeze his hand and he'd say, "I love you." Or he would, among a variety of phrases, or he'd sing the song, "I love you." Yeah, I'll stop there. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But just because that doll would say, "I love you," does that mean that it really loved me? No, that's silly. It's programmed to say that. It doesn't have a choice to say anything different. I think that likewise, if we as humans were programmed to say, "I love you, God," then is it truly love? I'd already know. I believe that love always involves a choice. Every action that we make, every decision, every sin, every service, everything we do is a measure of love. This is, what are you loving? Or who are you loving? If you sin by stealing, you're loving yourself because you want to give that to yourself more than the person that had it. If you're lying, there's impetus behind those lies. And I believe it's either pride, love of self, or love or protection of someone else, or whatever it may be, what have you. But also service. Going out and telling your friends and family about God, about Christ, and the salvation that you have, that's an act of love to Christ and to that person. So every action we make or take is a measurement of love. It always involves a choice. So in order for us to experience love, true love, God had to give us free will. He had to bestow upon us free will. However, unfortunately, mankind, as I'm sure you're aware, abused its free will and rejected God by turning away from Him. We reference this event as the fall of man. God created the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve sinned by eating the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They sinned. They turned away from God. And because of that, evil was now introduced to the world. Now the fall, it introduced two types of evil. Theologians, philosophers will divide them into two categories. There are moral evils and natural evils. Now moral evils, Moreland and Craig, they define it as all the evils that are the result of man's own inhumanity to man. So it's all the decisions that we make. So much of the world's suffering results from this moral evil. People, it's an action or inaction, lack of action of man to one another. For example, think about famine. in the world today. Did you know that the world produces enough food for every single person to have 3,000 calories a day? 3,000 calories. That's more than I eat on my cheat day. Like, that's amazing. We have enough food. It's man's own self-centeredness, irresponsibility that prevents people from getting fed. This is a moral evil. You can make the argument that's also a natural evil. Natural evils, these are the things like wildfires, earthquakes, tornadoes, tsunamis, hurricanes, all these natural evils that cause suffering for men, for people. Now, this is my personal view, and there are others. But I believe that natural evils are the indirect result of man's sin. I believe that when sin was introduced into the world, well, I like the way this author, he describes this point. He says, when we humans told God to shove off, he partially honored our request. Nature began to revolt. The earth was cursed. Genetic breakdown and disease began. Pain and death became part of the human experience. I believe our decision to introduce evil into the world, because we sin, because we have these moral evils, these contradictions to God, the world suffered as a result as well. We talk about the repercussions of our sins. They don't only affect you. The Bible, it says that these natural evils, that it says that sin, because of sin, that nature was corrupted. And thorns and thistles in Genesis 3, verse 17 through 18, talks about the thorns and thistles entered into the world. Bear with me, Romans 8, verse 19 through 23. Turn to Romans 8, if you will, while I grab a drink. Hey, the magic disappearing water trick. He did it again. Yeah, that was a hit. You all had to have been there. Yeah, I made water disappear. All right, Romans chapter 8. Here we go. Verse 19. Read along with me. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation, it was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption, and it will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have been the first fruits of the Spirit, grown inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Creation is longing to be rescued, to be redeemed. I believe that, in other words, nature longs for redemption to come and for things to be set right, to be made right. That's the source of disorder and chaos. After all, what was the only change that occurred between paradise, the Garden of Eden, perfection, and the world we live in now? It was the introduction of sin. So to me, that explains natural evils. But some people, you may be asking yourself, well, you say God's all powerful, couldn't he have foreseen this and prevented it? I mean, we have hurricanes that claim hundreds of lives, tornadoes, wildfires that claim hundreds, thousands of lives every year. Couldn't he have foreseen this? Yes, but consider it this way. Think about it this way, if you will. Many of you are parents. My sister and her husband, they have a newborn, baby Ethan. He's about 4 months old. We got to see him on our trip to Louisiana. And, I mean, I'll admit it, the baby craze, it comes in waves. It's amazing to see that life, the potential that's there. Many of you are parents this morning. You've had children. Even before you had your children, could you not expect that there was a very real possibility that they may suffer disappointment, pain, embarrassment, suffering, heartache in life, or that they might even hurt you and walk away from you. It's a scary thought, but one I believe we have all considered before having kids. But you still had kids. Well, why? Why did you have kids? Because you understood and you knew that there was the potential for these evils, yes, but there was also the potential for these extravagant joys. This love that surpasses all other relationships. That there's a potential there for tremendous joy, deep love, and great meaning. Now, I know this analogy, it's not perfect, but think about it in relation to God and humanity. He knew that we would rebel against him. But he also knew that there were some people that would choose to follow after him, that would choose to love him. They want to have a relationship with him, spend eternity with him, and he decided that that was worth it. Even though it would cost great pain. And you got to think about this. Okay, well, God created us, but if it's really worth it, I mean, what is he sacrificing to make this so? I mean, we're sacrificing so much, it seems like. Well, John 3:16 tells us what God sacrificed. He gave his only begotten Son, so that whoever would believe in him will not perish but have everlasting life. In fact, it talks about how we are in active rebellion in Romans. Paul, he says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You were in direct opposition. You are, God's here, sin's here. They cannot cohabitate. But while we are in the exact opposite end of the spectrum, while we are in active rebellion against God, he sent his Son to die for you, to die for me. Why would God go to such lengths to rid the world of something he created if you believe God created evil? It just doesn't make sense. Jesus, he says, why would they say that he's Satan casting out demons? He said, why would you turn on your own kingdom? It just doesn't make logical sense. Why would Satan be casting out his own demons? Obviously, I'm not affiliated with them. I'm the opposite of them. I'm giving life. In the same way, why would God get rid of evil or pay such a high price to give forgiveness of evil if he created it in the first place? So we have the first point. God did not create evil. All right, kick it into gear, Zach. Here we go. Point number 2, guideline number 2, to better understanding this point. Though suffering isn't good, God can use it to accomplish good. Hear me again. Though suffering isn't good, God can use that suffering to accomplish good, to bring about good. He made a promise in Romans 8:28. He says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his promises, or according to his purpose. Notice that the verse, it doesn't say that God causes evil and suffering, no. It's just that he promises good will come as a result of all things. It also doesn't say that good results will be immediately tangible or recognizable. Just because we have the promise does not mean that he owes it to us to reveal the good. My dad's going through this chemotherapy. That doesn't mean I'm going to be able to see the good that's going to come out of it immediately. Can't have that expectation. And unfortunately, there are many things that we will never recognize the good that comes from them in this life. Remember the fog illustration that we talked about earlier. There are many things that we won't recognize. You won't get the perfect, clear view of why God allowed that to happen in your life, but you got glimpses of it while you're here on this earth. But notice also that there's a condition to this promise. There's a condition, and that is to its recipients. the recipients. Who's this to? Who gets to participate in this promise? God promises that good will emerge from all things, including evil. That is, if we are committed to following after Him. You got to be pursuing God. If you aren't, then what's your faith going to be in? It's going to be in whatever this world has. It's going to be in doctors. It's going to be in money. It's going to be in what the world has to offer, and it's not going to satisfy. I guarantee it. But whenever you follow after God, you get to see where your faith has panned out, where you get to grow your faith by enduring through trials, through these hardships, through these sufferings. You get to grow in your faith. And you get to see that God has you. And that's the reason for the hope that we have today. The Old Testament, it gives a great illustration, a great example at this point. The Bible does such a great job of backing up its theology, of its points that it has. And I believe the best illustration of this is the story of Joseph. He was one of the 12 sons, sold into slavery by his own brothers. I mean, me and my brother have had some fights, but he's never tried to sell me off anywhere. Although they did convince me I was adopted for a while there. That was pretty mean. What? But yeah, his own brothers sold him into slavery. He was unfairly accused of a crime with Potiphar's wife. He was thrown into prison under false pretenses. This sounds like an awful life. 12 years he sat in prison. He was in prison until finally he was put into a role of great authority where he could save the lives of the very same brothers that sold him into slavery, who began that awful tragedy of a life. Because I don't know who would argue that you would want to go through what Joseph did there, those times of being in prison or sold in slavery. That doesn't sound like fun. But in the end, in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, this is Joseph. He's speaking to his brothers who have come before him, have realized, oh my God, that's Joseph. I thought he was dead. I can't believe it. And now he's the second most powerful leader in the modern world at that time. Oh my goodness. And Joseph, this is what he says. This is beautiful. This is a beautiful illustration of this point. He says, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Amen. To bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. God allowed that awful, horrendous, tragic experience in order to give life today. God can use suffering to accomplish good things. If you're committed to following after God, He promises that He can take the evil and suffering that you're experiencing and create good from it. Some of you know Robert Wilson and Terry. Terry's niece, Angie Dowhood, has cancer, lesions on the brain. Is going through chemotherapy. Was given 6 months to live. Young, great, healthy, amazing, godly woman. Why would God allow her to die? But you know what? All of her family and friends, we're all mourning this prognosis, what seems to be inevitable. But Angie, you look at her Facebook page, scriptures that she's posting. In every event, in every picture that she has, she is proclaiming the gospel and saying, you know what? No matter what happens, if I am healed tomorrow or if I die tonight, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to proclaim the gospel. She recognizes the good that can come from evil, and she is active in bringing it about. Praise the Lord. Amen. That's the way we need to be. We need to recognize that suffering, it's not good. I'm not taking away from the fact that it is a horrendous and difficult tragedy. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't expect God to be able to bring about good from it. God could draw something good from our pain in a myriad of ways if we would simply trust and follow after Him. The third point, the third guideline, the day is coming when suffering will cease, when suffering will end and God will judge evil. There's a day coming. I've heard some people ask, well, if He has the power to eradicate evil and suffering, then why doesn't He do it? Well, they do well to realize that just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean that it won't happen. I'm reading through a few different books at the moment, and I've made it roughly 3/4 of the way through my fun book. It's it's usually like teen novels and stuff. It's really dorky. But I get a kick out of them. And imagine if 3/4 of the way through this book, I was to put a bookmark in it, close it up, come to you and say, that book was awful. That author, he has so many loose ends. There's so many unresolved characters. Like, this is ridiculous. I can't recommend you read this book. This is terrible. And if you heard that I still hadn't finished the book, you'd be like, what are you talking about? Go finish the book, you goofball. It doesn't make sense. Well, the story of this world, the story of creation is not finished. Amen. The Bible, it tells us that there is a day coming when every person will have to give an account of their lives to God, and evil will be judged once and for all. It will be eradicated, annihilated, done away with, cease to exist. That day's coming. Just because it hasn't come yet, because we haven't experienced that, the desistance of suffering, does not mean that it won't come. And in fact, we should be living every day as if that day could be today. It could be before we leave this church this morning. You could be face to face with the Creator of this universe and having to give an account for your life. That's a scary thought. But for Christians, it's a hopeful thought. Amen. Because we know evil will be done away with. No more suffering, no more pain. The fourth and final point, guideline, in understanding this problem of evil, is that our suffering, it will pale in comparison to what God has in store for His followers. I certainly don't want to minimize pain and suffering, but it helps if we take a long-term look at our reality. Look at this verse written by Paul. And remember Paul, the Apostle Paul, he suffered beatings, stoning, shipwrecks, imprisonments, rejection, abuse, hunger, thirst, homelessness, and far more pain than some of us will ever experience. These are his words. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 17. He begins, for this light momentary affliction. Actually, wait a minute. Light momentary affliction? This is the same apostle that was flogged, 39 lashes, had it 5 different times, had his back ripped apart with 39 lashes from a whip. That 3 separate times was stoned. I'm sorry, he was beaten to a bloody pulp by rods, and he was stoned. But he says, for this light momentary affliction. Paul is a beast. Golly, is that not incredible? He compares, this is nothing, guys, because why? This light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. The suffering that you experience in this life pales in comparison. It does not even hold a candlelight in comparison to the spotlight, to the sun. That is God's glory. He has in store for us. Paul also in Romans 8, verse 18, he says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that is to be revealed to us." They're not even worth comparing. Imagine with me if January 1st, you begin the new year, it's New Year's, you're ready to start off the new year, it's going to be a great year, right? On your way to work, you get into a car wreck. And there's a problem with your insurance, so you have to pay for it out of pocket. You're extremely in debt. Your boss fires you. Your best friend betrays you. You go through basically like Alexander in the very no good, awful, bad excuse of a day, or whatever that book is. You go through the worst day that you can think of. But the next morning, you wake up, you feel great. My back's not hurting like it was from the wreck. Your friend gets a promotion at work and repays you for investing or whatever, and you make $1 million now. Your boss, he regrets firing you and instead makes you CEO of the company. And then you have a 6-month vacation in Tahiti. You get to do all these amazing things. And this continues for every single day from then on for the rest of the year. Imagine if I was to come up to you that next year and say, "How's your year been?" You would immediately say, "Amazing! It's been so incredible! I've just got back from the Bahamas, and me and my wife, we are having the best marriage of our lives. This is incredible! It's just, I could not be happier." I was like, wait a second. I seem to recall there was, at the beginning of the year, there was a problem, wasn't there? It seemed like it was kind of bad. You'd say, "Yeah, you're right. That was a bad day, I'll admit." But even though it was difficult at the time, it was hard. It was hard and it was painful. But when I look at the totality of the year, when I put everything into this context of how great the year has been since then, I consider it a great year. The 364 days outweigh the one. That day sort of fades away. And maybe this is a good analogy for heaven. It might be terrible, this life. You might be suffering. You might have chronic pains, literal pains. You might be suffering heartache, betrayal. Just think that in heaven, after 8,476,412 days, I come up to you and I ask you, "So how's your existence been up to this point?" Would you not immediately reply, "Tremendous. I'm in the glory of God for eternity. I have this to look forward to for the rest of my life. I get to experience this and have experienced it." I say, "Well, wait a second. What about, didn't you have a tough time before you got to heaven? Don't you remember living on earth?" Yeah, I'll admit, those 80 years, those 90 years, whatever it may be, those were tough. They were difficult. I experienced a lot of pain, a lot of brokenness, a lot of heartache, a lot of betrayal, of distrust. There's evil and suffering in that life. Yes, you're right. But it pales in comparison to what I have now. A British church leader, Galvin Reed, he talks about meeting a young man who had fallen down a flight of stairs as a baby and shattered his back. He'd been in and out of hospitals his whole life, and yet he made the astounding comment that he thinks God is fair. Brother Reed, he went to him and he asked him, "How old are you?" The boy said 17. "How many years have you been in the hospital?" The boy answered, 13 years. "Pastor," he said with astonishment, "and you think that's fair?" To which the boy replied, "Well, God has all eternity to make up for it. And He will. God promises there is a time when there will be no more crying, no more tears, no more pain, no more suffering, and we will be reunited with God in perfect harmony in heaven forever." Let the words of 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, soak over you as we close. What no eye has seen, nor ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him.
Amen.
That's absolutely breathtaking, isn't it? I have a good imagination. And I can't even get close to the joy, to the love, to the end of evil. So this is the hope that I have when I'm faced with difficulty.
Amen.
When I go through the trials, when I suffer. Because you will. You will have pain. You will have suffering in your life. You will experience evil things in this life. But my hope is in God. The worst possible thing that could happen in this life pales in comparison to a single minute of the life that I am going to live in heaven. What's to come? However, the Bible, it tells us that heaven's reserved for a certain set of people. That is those who have accepted Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. Some of you in this room may have never made that decision to trust Christ. Do not leave this church without having the assurance, the same hope that I'm able to rely on. Grab me, pull me aside, talk with me. Let me tell you about this hope that you can have. Let's pray.